Animal trafficking is an industry worth billions and a major threat to countless species. And now it's gone online. A new investigation reveals a growing cybertrade in wildlife. From elephant ivory to live tiger cubs, it takes just minutes to find illegal products for sale. So, is the internet undermining the battle for conservation? You're watching Roundtable with me, Shuli Ghosh. It's a new tool in the arsenal of the poachers and a major threat to endangered species. Online sales of illegal animal products. Now, global tech companies including Google, Microsoft and eBay have joined forces as part of a global coalition to end the online trade of endangered species.
The world's wildlife is facing a new threat. Poaching has brought many species to the verge of extinction. The trade has been banned in most countries. Now, the new challenge is to stop illegal animal trade online. The internet has become the world's largest marketplace, providing a vast platform for the sales of both legal and illegal items. Last year, investigators in Europe looked at the online trade of wildlife. Over 6 weeks, they found over 11,000 endangered species being traded, spread over 4 social media platforms and 106 online marketplaces. There were more than 5,000 adverts for animal trade. Over that 6-week period, the trade was estimated at nearly $4 million. For some species, the situation is desperate. The last male white rhino became extinct earlier this year. Globally, there's only 30,000 rhinos left. Demand for elephant tusks and rhino horns is mainly from Far East Asia, where they're used for traditional medicine.
We've just got to persuade the people in Vietnam and in Cambodia and in Laos and in China. Listen, if you have problems with sex, chew your fingernails, it's the same product.
The places where you can buy illegal animal goods have dramatically decreased as countries banned the trade. But social media has given traders a new platform. Investigators found that 6.2% of wildlife trade was taking place on social media. Although many platforms have signed up to the global coalition to end wildlife trafficking online, it hasn't deterred traffickers. A Wildlife Justice Commission investigation in Vietnam uncovered a criminal network using Facebook and WeChat as part of its operations to sell illegal wildlife products. Instagram announced that users searching for posts such as selfies featuring wildlife will be greeted with a message. It warns against animal abuse and the sale of endangered animals and their parts. eBay banned ivory trade in 2009. And in just 1 year, eBay removed or blocked more than 25,000 wildlife listings. Online trading of wildlife has become big business. Are social media companies and online marketplaces doing enough? What more needs to be done to end this illicit trade that continues to threaten the world's most vulnerable creatures?
Joining us from Cambridge is Crawford Allan, Senior Director of Traffic, a wildlife trade monitoring network. In Dhaka is Gary Collins from WildTeam Bangladesh, who will soon be managing an anti-wildlife trafficking project in Bangkok. In the studio we have Philip Mansbridge, the UK Director of the International Fund for Animal Welfare, and Dilys Roe from the International Institute for Environment and Development. Welcome to you all. Philip, let me start with you because we saw in the report there details about IFAW's investigation into online trade. It's incredible. In just 6 weeks, you uncovered over 5,000 adverts.
Yes, and that was actually only in 4 different marketplaces as well. And those adverts constituted almost 12,000 protected species for sale. And that included live species as well. Around 80% of those were live specimens, and some were products and artifacts. And that was birds, reptiles, ivory, and other mammal products as well.
So presumably you can just click buy, and this item that you've bought, this live animal or whatever it is that you've bought, ivory, is just transported to you And presumably you, as the consumer and the trader, have relative anonymity.
Yes, completely. That's exactly right. And that's the difficulty about the internet. It offers great opportunities, but it is, as you mentioned, a growing threat to wildlife.
Crawford, you were one of the driving forces behind this global coalition involving all these tech companies. Now, this sounds like a massive undertaking, combing through what must be, billions and billions of adverts.
Yeah, it sure is. And, but we've been very heartened by the fact that over the past 2 years, working in partnership actually with I4 and with World Wildlife Fund, we've managed to bring together a new global coalition to end wildlife trafficking online, with 21 of the world's leading online e-commerce and social media companies, including names like Google, Microsoft, Facebook, Alibaba, and Tencent in China, that really do cover the majority of trade online. And they've really now stepped up and realized the threat from wildlife trafficking, not just for conservation, but also to their reputations and the risk in how they operate.
So tell me how it works. These tech companies are what? Keeping an eye out for illegal trade products that are coming up online for sale?
Well, they really didn't understand the scale and the scope of the problem until we got involved a couple of years ago and started to show them really what was happening. And we also provide an action plan for them to be part of the coalition, which takes them through a stepwise process to really reduce the threat of trafficking. So that includes refining those digital algorithms they use to automatically detect ads, to make them so that they have a way of finding what's there, stopping it being posted in the first place so the ads never reach the internet. The other thing is that they have to have a consistent policy which agrees the species that are prohibited for sale on those sites. That's largely based around international law, CITES on wildlife trafficking, that sets a list of species that must not be sold. We help them identify which species must not be sold. We train their staff, we provide them with e-learning systems, and we help them refine their automated mechanisms too, to bring down those ads, to close the marketplace off, and leave there no place to hide wildlife traffickers that are profiting extinction.
Gary, let me come to you, because obviously the online trade is just one of the many worries facing conservationists, facing people who are fighting the traffickers. How worrying is it, the ease with which people can buy and sell animals and animal parts despite the international convention which aims to prevent this kind of illegal trade?
It's extremely worrying, but I'm not surprised. Bangladesh is a source country for for wildlife. My project is focused on tiger conservation, and in Bangladesh we have more or less 100 tigers left, and you only find the tigers in the Sundarbans. The reason the tigers are in the Sundarbans is it's the only place in Bangladesh which is an extremely crowded country where there are no people. Tigers and people cannot live together. That's clear. But the greatest threat to the tigers are poachers. And we're not talking about villagers going out killing tigers. We're talking about organized criminal
proper
mafia.
Criminal gangs. I mean, so clearly there's laws against this, but what are the key barriers in enforcing those laws, in preventing illegal trade?
Well, number one is poverty. The vast majority of crimes, I think, are committed because of poverty. Women don't willfully go into prostitution. They go into it for financial gain. They're usually from poor backgrounds. Bangladesh gives up a lot of its wildlife because it's an extremely poor country. Law enforcement is not what it should be. South Asia, generally speaking, has law enforcement that's got a long way to go before they come up to international standards so that they can protect their human resources. Corruption, which goes hand in hand with poverty. Forest guards in Bangladesh make approximately $150 per month. And one can easily see that making such a small salary, the forest guards are prone to taking money from the smugglers. I'm not saying that this is universal, certainly not. There are a lot of honest people in the forest department. They're doing fantastic work. But this is an endemic problem throughout the country.
Dilys, do you think we look at enough at the reasons that trafficking happens? rather than just saying, well, it's bad and it must stop?
Yeah, I don't think we do look enough at the reasons, and particularly at the source where the poaching is actually happening. I think we fail to understand why people who live alongside wildlife might get engaged in poaching, or they might get involved in stopping poaching. And the reasons are, that they might support poaching or engage in it themselves are quite often because, they experience severe costs from living with wildlife. I mean, we like to look at elephants and lions and see them on the television, but actually, if you have one in your back garden, they trample your crops, lions kill your livestock, they cause serious damage. An elephant can wipe out a farmer's entire livelihood for 1 year.
But then shouldn't it be an issue of managing that scenario rather than being soft on poaching and animal trafficking?
I think we need to be hard on poaching, but we do also need to manage that scenario, and that dealing with the costs of living with wildlife has really been overlooked and can actually be a far more significant threat to some species than the poaching itself. In the case of lions, more lions are killed as a result of retaliatory killings because the lions have killed livestock or killed a human or child rather than from poaching.
But I get the outrage that we see about animal trafficking is often not those cases, but either sort of trophy hunters coming in from the West, and you see those awful, distasteful pictures on Facebook and social media of people posing with some poor animal they've shot, or the criminal gangs that make a living trapping and exporting these animals. How do we build a network that defeats that?
It's about working at all levels. It's a complicated issue, but the process at a base level is quite simple. It's about engaging the communities. There's no point, and none of our organisations do this, but there's no point to just kind of go in, try and apply a fix, and then kind of withdraw. You need the community. You need to understand their issues. Exactly what Dilys said. I mean, for us, it's so easy to kind of see an elephant or a tiger or a lion and go, oh my gosh, I can't believe that anybody wouldn't want those in their environment, because us as people from the UK and Westerners will pay thousands and thousands to go and see these animals in their natural environment. But if they took away our food source and if they took away our family members, then obviously we'd have a different opinion of that. So it's about engaging with communities, offering alternative livelihoods, sustainable community projects where they get a value from the wildlife rather than just a negative interaction. And that's when the balance starts to change, and that's when they start to drive poachers out, because... Do
you think that's happening enough, though? I mean, Crawford and Gary, I'm interested to know what you think about this. At the moment, there is, international outrage every time we see a picture of a dead tiger cub or an elephant that's been shot for its ivory. But do you think there's enough work being done on at a grassroots level to encourage local communities in these countries to see these animals as a potential source of revenue in ways other than selling them to animal traffickers?
The organization that I work with, WildTeam, is a Bangladeshi NGO. Started working with local communities around the Sundarbans 15 years ago, and we've organized something called the Village Tiger Response Teams. Village Tiger Response Teams are educated about the need to have the apex predator active and doing what they do in the Sundarbans in order for the Sundarbans to survive. Typically, when a tiger came into a village, the people would surround it and beat it to death with the bamboo sticks. Now, with the Village Tiger Response Teams, they they allow the tiger an exit back into the forests. In 2017, we had 7 incidences where the tiger strayed into a village and the VTRTs went into action, and the tiger escaped and went back into the village, into the Sundarbans. Another area that we're working on is educating the community, and we're working with children. We've created videos to teach them about the importance of the tiger, and I think that it's going to take a long time. Unfortunately, in Bangladesh, when we achieve success, there might not be any tigers left. That's a reality. But there is positive evidence that this works. I think that it's important that having a tiger paw on your mantle is seen as uncool. that similar to not eating shark fin soup, that's extremely important. We have various instances over the past generation where the community, the people have been taught what not to do, not to smoke, not to litter, wide variety of things. And I think that we're at the cusp of what we need to do with wildlife trafficking. Unfortunately, this should have started 50, 60 years ago.
Right, because any incremental improvements are coming so slowly. Crawford, I know that you've led Traffic's black market investigations internationally in dozens of countries. You know, what are the biggest obstacles in enforcing protection laws?
Well, I think, you know, the obvious one, the elephant in the room, is the issue of corruption. We see so many times that both initiatives that are on the ground, providing community incentives, providing systems by which people can make a living of living together with wildlife and helping protect wildlife. Our colleagues here have made it so clear that is absolutely essential for the long-term sustainable solution. However, these things get undermined because what happens is there is an area in this problem that really is not being addressed, and that is really the middlemen, the trafficking nexus, the interface between the local communities and the end consumer market, where you're having a whole network of organized criminal gangs that move into these communities. They provide not just incentives and funding for local people to go and poach, but they also corrupt the local law enforcement and then all the way along that trafficking chain to the end market. Unfortunately, the money is so great and the risks are so low in detection and prosecution that it is perverting, fortunately, law enforcement themselves to being facilitating the problem too. So unless we combine this holistic approach we've already heard about with the community work, but also with targeting these criminal nexus and dealing with the corruption issue, we will have this problem for a very long time. There are many strands to this story and many parts to the solution. And when you have one area that's really not being addressed, it's always going to undermine the others.
Yeah, I mean, the way Crawford puts it, it just sounds like an insurmountable problem. Do you think we're making progress, and what more needs to be done?
I think we are making progress. There are some countries where poaching is declining, but I really think what more needs to be done is to really make wildlife an economically viable option for people to conserve. At the moment, there's very little incentive for people not to get involved in poaching and to invest in wildlife conservation instead. So we need to think of innovative ways where people can really see that having wildlife on their land alive is worth their while. So that might be through tourism, it might be through trophy hunting. You mentioned this, but it is completely different to illegal wildlife trade. It is completely legal, and if done properly, can actually generate significant revenues for conservation.
Yeah, that does raise people's hackles, doesn't it, this idea of trophy hunting? We saw the case of Cecil the lion, a much-loved lion that was shot by a US dentist, I think, and as you say, it was legal. He didn't face any charges, but that caused a lot of outrage.
It did, and it is certainly an industry that, I mean, I fail to understand why anybody would want to shoot an elephant or a lion personally, but looking at the hard facts associated with it, it does, in cases where tourism isn't viable, so more remote areas where you can't put tourism infrastructure in place, it can actually be one of the few sources of income. And in some places, in Zimbabwe, for example, there are areas of land that are currently under wildlife that used to be used for livestock. The land's been moved out of livestock and into wildlife, and it's purely because of trophy hunting that has generated the right incentives for that.
I imagine that's quite an unpopular view amongst the rest of our guests. What does anyone think about trophy hunting as a way of conservation and earning money?
I thought it isn't something that we support. I mean, the research that we've done shows that a very tiny percentage of the money often finds its way back into the community. But the fundamental for us is that we believe that animals have like an intrinsic value and not kind of like a price on their head. And we don't want to get into a situation.
But if you've got 100 billion elephants making a mess of, your land, your farmland in South Africa, for example, where elephants aren't endangered, and I'm not advocating this at all, but would it be one thing to look at?
Nature has quite a good way of remedying itself, is what I would say. And if you're talking about elephants, they have some fairly complex matriarchal and family structures. Simply removing one of the things that is often cited is we remove the old or the ill or the infirm or something like that. But nature has these coping mechanisms to do that, be that animal or human, to manage populations and to make sure that education is passed down, if we're talking about elephants, for example. So it isn't something that we endorse. I understand there are arguments on both sides.
It's difficult. I mean, there is an argument there, but there is a distaste for any kind of hunting, be it poaching or trophy hunting. Gary, you wanted to say something earlier.
Yeah, I wanted to make a point and to follow on to what Crawford said. The villagers in Bangladesh don't make much money off of tiger poaching. Pennies, actually. The poachers might purchase a goat, poison goat, throw the goat into the Sundarbans, and then go collect the tiger the next day. But the villagers who are subject to human-tiger conflict, we do have tiger widows, women whose husbands have been killed by tigers. That happens. But the people are understanding. People have been living with tigers in this part of the world for tens of thousands of years. So they understand that it requires a balance. But another problem we find in Bangladesh is the legislation is good. There's nothing wrong with the law, as you can imagine. The problem is the implementation. And we do work with the Forest Department. We've worked with other security forces on arresting and how to secure a crime scene and things like that. But despite the number of arrests we have not had in Bangladesh one conviction for tiger poaching. And the police have found live tiger cubs, tiger parts, but not one conviction. So
do we need to see more commitments from governments, from law enforcement agencies? Does this have to move up the political agenda?
Something has to happen because the system is broken. When you have people that are caught red-handed with tiger parts, which is in and of itself a crime. I'm not saying you killed the tiger, but you're in illegal possession of tiger parts. That's a crime. You should serve prison time, but it's not happening. Something happens between the arrest and conviction that kicks you back out on the streets.
All right, so commitment to that is one issue. Crawford, let's just bring it back around to the online coalition. Yeah. Are you happy with what's happening? Does more need to happen? Can we break that cyber trade in wildlife trafficking?
Well, I think my colleagues would agree that in the civil society sector we're all in. It's never enough. Right, it's never enough. We always want more. And I do think that we're at the start of something massive here. I think we've got a major opportunity to bring about a paradigm shift in the way that these online companies work and operate. The critical thing for me is that we have them sitting around the table together. They're highly competitive companies who see this issue as non-competitive. They've found a common ground to share best practices and ideas, to prevent this so-called whack-a-mole effect, where the weakest link, the platform that doesn't have the restrictions and controls, is where the traffickers gravitate towards. They come together and provide the same level of great protections. Then that pushes those traffickers out from the surface web, which has basically a marketplace of billions of consumers, pushes it into a smaller, discrete, illicit dark web, which means that the general profitability of the operation and the access to the end consumer is really limited. That's kind of where we're headed for.
Just briefly, we know there's a major conference on the wildlife trade in the UK in October. We've talked about the problems of getting convictions for animal traffickers. What do you want to see from commitments from global leaders in October?
One of the main things from the UK is to see the Ivory ban be fully into legislation. So that's a ban on the sale of ivory with some limited exemptions. That's now been laid in Parliament, and many organisations have been working on that behind the scenes to help that come in. We're actually in Parliament just before it came here, giving oral evidence about that bill as the bill starts to progress through the stages. So I think that's a really important thing. It sends a strong message that ivory only has a value when it's on a living elephant, and that's a message that we want to be sending globally. There's also work on enforcement. There's some additional online actions about having to list the permit number, which is coming in to force. So there are a few changes like that which are going to be really helpful.
And Dilys, last word to you. What's the one thing you'd like to see?
I'd like to see far more attention to listening to communities and hearing their voices at the conference itself. The London conference will be the 4th in a series of international conferences on illegal wildlife trade, and commitments have been made at every single one of those around law enforcement, around improving the capacity of the judiciary, and around engaging local communities. So I don't think we need more commitments. I think we need the commitments that have been made to actually be implemented. And the major gap I see there is around the community side and actually listening to them and having them present there and being an active stakeholder in the discussion.
And hopefully changing perceptions about some of these erroneous myths that have grown up about animal products. Thank you very much indeed to all of my guests. I think we've established that things are changing. We're going in the right direction. Hopefully it will happen before any more species go extinct. Thank you very much indeed for that. Thank you for watching. That's been this edition of Roundtable. I'll see you next time.